in Surah Ibrahim. You see, in Surah Ibrahim, the Quran tells us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, every prophet we have sent used the language of his own community so that he can make things clear to them. The language of his own community. And so did the Prophet, the language of his own community, which is Arabic. But the Quran being a revelation and the basic text of a very important religion in the world, yani, had to be translated to other people who don't know Arabic. During the time of the Prophet, we can assume that he allowed it because, as you know, he sent letters or messages to Kisra, Persia, and Qaisar, and etc., other people, inviting them to Islam using some certain verses of the Quran. And it must be assumed that he expected these verses to be translated into the language of those people. Okay? But when we come to the Islamic tradition and the Islamic subject, we find very little is said about this. Everybody assumed at the time that the Quran is Arabic and it's all Arabic. Until the time of Abu Hanifa in the 2nd century of the Hijrah, the question was put to him because by that time so many people from Persia had become Muslims, and the question was asked, can a Muslim who does not know Arabic read the Fatiha in the daily prayer, the Salah? Can a Muslim read the Fatiha in another language than Arabic? Interesting question. And Abu Hanifa said yes, he could read the Fatiha in Arabic in the prayer, but that was a very limited task and purpose. Prayer and the that particular passage of Arabic. Nothing much was said about translation, and as I said, we don't find, even Persians did not talk about it, and Turks and so on. But we find sometime very early books of tafsir, people putting the Arabic text in one line and underneath it adding a tafsir in their own language. Tafsir. This was done and continued to be done, I am sure, because people wanted to know what is there in the Quran. Then this, as I said, people did not talk much, did not study what is translation, what goes into it. Only recently has translation become a distinct discipline of its own. And now it is a discipline to study. We have, for instance, at SOAS, University of London, people come to study for a PhD on one aspect of the translation of the Quran. That's SOAS London. You have Leeds University has a very important center there as well, which talks about translation of the Quran as a discipline. And now there is in Wales, in Swansea University, there is also a center that takes the translation of the Quran as a discipline. So it's now a discipline. We must deal with it as such. Okay. Now we deal with it as something. I will talk about translation of the Quran into English, of course, which started in 1647. 1647, I think. But before that, we must go before that, about 5 centuries before, to the Latin translation of the Quran. A Latin translation of the Quran. This was يعني commissioned by the abbot of Cluny in France. Take this, remember this. We have here an abbot of Christianity. These were the people who took translation of the Quran did more than others. And the abbot of Cluny decided to have a Latin translation of the Quran, and he commissioned an English young man, was called Robert of Keaton, and Robert of Keaton and a number of other British and other European countries were there in Spain at the time, because in Spain they had the centers of great learning of Islam, medicine, algebra, optics, all the sciences were studied there. So these people were there to study the great subjects of Islam. And Robert of Keaton was commissioned with someone else to do a translation of the Quran. Why did the abbot of Cluny do it? Very interesting. He said he was not satisfied with the progress of the Crusades. The Crusades did not achieve what they were sent out to do, which is defeat the Muslims, etc. They didn't. He was not satisfied with that. So he said, we should now use the sword of knowledge with these people, with the Muslim. The sword of knowledge. Interesting. He's still talking about swords in dealing with the Muslims and their texts. But it's much better than those who use actual swords to defeat the Muslims. So, and he commissioned this very important translation in the history of all translations of the Quran, I think. It was done by Robert and another colleague of his, and sent given to the man, the abbot, to be in his custody. Interesting that only very few people, it was available only to few people, great Christian bishops and so on, could have access to this one Latin translation. It was not available to anybody else. And this went on for 4 centuries, up to 1543. This means that a whole 9 centuries have passed for Islam without this translation became publicized in 1543. 900 people, which explains, I'm sure, why these outside the Dar al-Islam, knowledge of the Quran was very limited. And I remember our professors in SOAS once saying that people at that time, and for a long time, people in Europe thought that Muhammad was buried in a coffin which is placed above the Kaaba, silver coffin placed above the Kaaba. Their knowledge of Islam it was limited. Now, come on, when we look at this translation, the Latin translation, very important as it is, we find that the people who read it were very amused and surprised, because they expected the Quran to be like the Bible, starting from Genesis, going on and on and on. They found something different. This baffled them. They said, what is this? It is not chronological, and it is not arranged by theme, and so on. Additionally, they obviously could not understand the mind and the way the Quran talks about things. For instance, but you know very well at the end of ayat, we have something called fasila in Arabic, rhyme in English, if you like, in which at the end of the verse it says, Inna Allah alimun hakim. Inna Allah qawiyyun qadir
अरे
or
ना
something.
हस्तम इन वर्कशॉप है या इन क्लास है
نه वर्कشاپ همین ورکشاپ
माले माहाने मंथली टॉक नहीं थी
نه این مامسی تاک منتظر
Can you kindly silence your microphone, please, whoever is coming? Thank you.
Who?
Sorry,
What's this?
sorry. Someone left the microphone on. Please carry on.
They found the end of the verses strange, and they thought it was completely separate from the verse itself. So they said, well, what is this? What idiot would think otherwise, that God is powerful and forgiving and so on. They imagine that the end of the verse is just something stuck at the end to achieve the rhyme. This conception continued up to very recently. People, even scholars of the Quran, were talking about this until we had to explain and show them that the end of the verse is integral with it's part of what has gone before. Okay? So, however, 4 centuries have passed in Europe with this translation being in the hands of very few people. And then it occurred to some to publish it when the printing was invented by them. And so they did. One publisher took the daring step to publish the Latin translation. Immediately, the council of the city seized all the copies and imprisoned the publisher. See this? They were afraid of Islam quite clearly and do not want ordinary people in the street what the Quran is about. Yes, it was the intervention of Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther.
Hmm?
Not King.
Martin Lings. Martin
Luther.
Luther. Martin Luther interfered and campaigned for the publication of the Latin translation of the Quran. But this became, we are now in the 16th centuries. It became people in other languages, national language like English, French, and German, began to make their own translations of the Quran based on that Latin, great Latin. I call it great because it is most important Latin translation. In England, we had someone in 1649. It's called Alexander Ross, who was a vicar, and he decided to translate the Quran into English for the first time. 1946. Number one, he did not know any Arabic. He translated a French version of the Quran written by the French counselor in Istanbul. So he didn't know Arabic. He translated from another language, and he saw it as a means to criticize the Prophet and the Quran. He called it the Al-Quran of Muhammad, the Prophet of the Turks, newly Englished for the satisfaction of those who wanted to look into the Turkish vanity. And he also wrote another short book called about the Prophet of Muhammad, about the Prophet. obviously the intention was to criticize, to attack. To criticize, to attack. This really and truly remained with some people. In the 17th centuries, even a professor at Cambridge said he will study the Quran in order to attack it or criticize it at least. This was the intention, and terrible to have such an intention to translate a book. You will have to be, a translator has to be objective and not is there to criticize or to, as happened with some Muslim later, he translate the Quran in order to show that it is better than the Bible. We have some Muslim who do this. That's bad intention. Have to be objective. Objectivity means that you deal the text as it was, the text as it is, if you know the language and if you know how to translate such level of language. So that was Alexander Ross. For about a century, this was the only available translation of the Quran into English until Sale, Robert Sale, came in, I think it is 1743. Let me get some dates from here. Yes, 1740.
34.
Oh, 1734. Okay. Sale was much better than Alexander Ross, but Sale was an English lawyer. He could not possibly have learned enough Arabic to study the Quran. Not possibly. His translation naturally was much better. No doubt about that. But the fact remains that he could not have learned enough Arabic to translate the Quran. And in fact, what he did and some others after him, they relied on a Latin translation of the Quran by something called Marachi, who is again a cleric, the Christian Catholic Church, who this Marachi was important because he obviously is Italian. He had more access to the Quran and to the Islamic subjects like tafsir and seerah and so on. So he was much better than them. But though he was an important scholar, you find when he translated, he will take a passage, say a paragraph, and put the Arabic text, number one. Number two, the Latin text. Number three, criticism of the Quran. Every passage, the Arabic text, the Latin text, and criticism of the Quran. But it was very important because people like Sale, and after that, someone like Rodwell, who did it in 1960s, Rodwell 1964. 1864. Sorry. 1861. That was Rodwell. Rodwell was again a cleric, and he relied mainly on Marachi's translation, but he was, I think there's more, we have a progress here. The man, also sometimes he criticized the Quran in things which he proved to be wrong. He was much better in his tone and his knowledge and his sense of what literary language is about. So he would keep saying in the footnote, this thing literally in Arabic, so, but I am putting it in a easier English for people to see. He was, as I said, I have examples of how he went wrong, for instance. The Quran says, لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله. Muslim and the Prophet say, we do not distinguish between any of God's prophets. In another surah, we says فضل الله بعض الأنبياء على بعض. You see, he misunderstood this. نفرق means that we believe in all the prophets. All the prophets. So in this sense, they are all the same to us. We believe in them all. Although God might have put some prophet above others. Okay, this is just an example of this gentleman, Rodwell. Then we move on to
1880.
1880. 1880. 1880. That was a very big, there was a big departure there by there's a man, what's his name? Palmer. Palmer's translation. Palmer was better than all others in two ways. Number one, he knew Arabic well. He lived among the Arabs in Sinai and Palestine and so on for some times. He even could write poetry in Arabic. So he had the ability. He had the ability to know Arabic well and to know the Qur'an. He also was free from any particular criticism of the Qur'an. He even said that we in England or in the West, people keep saying that Muhammad has taken something from earlier prophet. These prophetic stories in the Quran. But in the Lord's Prayer in Christianity, which is the basic source of Christianity, the main part of it is taken from Greek literature before Christianity. This shows you that he was not like others went out to. And his translation was a good translation, no doubt about it. And he was aware that the Quran is very condensed, and he had a volume of translation and another big volume of commentaries to explain. This was a good practice of his. Okay, we move on until that was, we said that was 1880. And
1930.
when we come after that, we come to the 19th, to the 20th century. The 20th century. This is important in many ways. Number one, Muslims have entered the field of translating the Quran into English for the first time. Okay? Muslims. And understandably, it was done by a Muslim from the Indian subcontinent.
Hyksos.
Who?
Hyksos.
Yes, no, Muslims. It was first done by the Indian, by Muslim from the Indian subcontinent, because for two reasons. Number one, English was their language of education in India, and because they could see the missionaries, what missionaries say about the Quran and about the translation of the Quran. So they had the zeal to do something for themselves, for their own religion, by starting to talk about, to translate the Quran. A number of people comes here. First, I think, is Maulana Muhammad Ali, who did his translation of the Quran in 1917, okay? Maulana Muhammad Ali from India. Then you had Yusuf Ali from India again, 1934. 1934. That was a big advance in translations of the Quran, because he is shown by his notes to have read very widely in Arabic, in language, and in the tafsirs. He was a very knowledgeable man indeed about the Quran in Arabic and in tafsir and so on. And this was there for a long time. You know, it's there up to now, especially by people from the Indian subcontinent. now it's called India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. Many of them have for a long time liked and appreciated Yusuf Ali. Then we come with another English, but another Muslim, but this time English Muslim called Mohammad Mirmadiouk Pickthall. He did his translation during the he did it
1930.
19 what?
1930.
1930. Very good. Thank you very much. So it was 1930. Pickthall, 1930. This was a tremendous change. And real English, native speakers of English, who became a Muslim and translated the Qur'an. And he also had sought help from some people in Al-Azhar to explain to him certain things. But Pickthall was the son of a vicar, and he grew up in the vicarage with appreciating the English Bible. You see, the old, the
King James.
the English version of the Bible, which was done in I think 16 something, and it had a great effect on the test of what good English is, and especially good English for talking about religion. The old English Bible. It had a great effect on setting the taste for what is good English and good English for translating religious texts. So he did it. He did in his translation of the Quran. You will find that it is done in that fashion. Although he's a Muslim, done in that fashion. And this will be found very soon after that to be too difficult and not very much to the taste of younger generations in our days. Okay, that is Pickthall. Who comes after Pickthall? We can come to someone, an English person called Richard Bell, 1937. Richard Bell was a cleric again. These people, you see, the people of the church took more interest than others. And he was teacher of Arabic, but his translation was very strange in a number of ways. He imagined, he said, the fact that the Quran sounds odd to us in the way we read it now does not mean that Muhammad himself was odd and didn't know how to arrange material. No, he did it well, but the material he wrote, the material the Quran was written on, leather, hides, they will put on one side a piece of Quran, and at the back, another piece of the Quran, and he came with the fantastic theory that when the Muslim came to collect these together, they muddled all things, put things on the back, in the front, very odd. And if you read his translation, you are amazed by his fancies about the arrangement of the Quran. Yeah, but, however, here we have it. It did not, his theory was rejected by, even by non-Muslims, English or British translation and scholars of the Quran. It did not gain any acceptance. However, it was there, and you will see that it didn't last much. You see, in addition to the volume of translation, you had a volume of commentaries. And in the comments, he says even more strange things. And I know that the comments were not did not sell and were remanded. They were given away or ditched. So he did not have any very great effect in the history of translating the Quran. Now we come to what I would think the best translator of the Quran in English up to that time, which is Abri, a professor of Arabic in Cambridge, who knew Arabic very well. He translated Arabic poetry many times before translating the Quran, and his translation was seen to be good and so on, highly respected. He lived in Cairo for some time. He was actually teaching classics in Cairo University. And he tells us that while he was there, psychologically at some time he had some trouble and could be relieved and comforted by a blind reciter of the Quran in the next door's house. And for this reason, he said this soothed him and make him more determined to write his own translation. And he did. His translation is still available up to now. It was published by OUP. But although it is poetic as he wants it, and no doubt it is very good in English, a sense of rendering a foreign text into English. But he just put the translation of the surahs as they are without putting one single footnote or making any comment beforehand, before the surahs, about what the contents of the surah is on. So that's why. And he used an older style of English, just like Big Soul, for instance, and Abri, that made his translation, although it continued for a long time, and he was an honest man. You will see after a while it becomes not the taste of the taste has changed in the English teaching of English and of poetry and so on. It has changed. The Latin or Latinized way of talking about Quranic verses and so on, it became unfamiliar with modern readers of English. When I arrived in this country and went to teach in London University after some years, I had, you see, my students who, interestingly enough, by that time, again, they were mainly Muslims, from the second generations of Muslims who came and settled in this country. When I was in Cambridge, I had only one single Muslim girl and 13 or 14 non-Muslim, Jews and Christians. That was good enough for me. I came to learn from them the taste here and so on. I love to see people from Christian or Jewish or any other coming to sit in my class and discuss with me. I get from them how they feel. However, by the time I came to SOAS, obviously, more Muslims have begun to study Islam in British universities. And Oxford University Press has decided that Arbery's translation was too old now, and decided to find someone to translate. They came and asked me, would you do a translation of the Quran? I was delighted, of course. And we agreed. The first thing I did was this. I brought and my full class of my students, MA students and PhD students, Muslims and non-Muslims. I asked them, what is the best translation of the Quran they read? You read. For my great surprise, the vast majority of them, they said, we do not read these translations. I said, why? They said, because they use a language which we have not studied at school and we are not studying in the university. So their language puts us off. That is their 95. There was one single Englishman who became a Muslim. He was over 72, I think. And he was not of that opinion. He liked the old elevated style. Naturally, that's his age, and I respected his opinion. What I said to the student then, I took one page, made a translation of one page, duplicated it, gave it to them, and said, here you are, take it home. Come next week and we will discuss it. They came next week and said, better, but still this and this and this. So I took it back and changed more. Take this home for a week, come back 3 times, until they said, this is just perfect. This level of language is what we need, what we appreciate. This was most important for me because I did not just by myself assume what is the best. Took it from these young people. And my target readership was that generation. Young people. The old people have their own and nothing can change them. These young, educated English students. Young, educated English students. That is why people of that age, when I did my translation, it was just very highly praised by students and teachers. Other teachers before me, Barbary and Bell, and etc., when they translated with the audience to them was their own peer. What would a professor of Arabic say about their translation? You see, that was their target. My target was young, educated people in English. Okay, so that was the first thing, setting the acceptable level. After that, I had to find what other things need to be done. Naturally, I knew from reading of the translations that there were many things wrong. I had to be corrected. They misunderstood certain things. They misunderstood. I had to correct. So I had to, after setting the target readership, I had to set the criteria for a good English, a good translation of the Quran in English. Okay. The number one, that it should be in English, not Arabic English. Many people, the Arabs themselves, you see, if some of them would translate the Quran, so naturally they are affected by their own language. And even some English professors, they were writing Arabic English, because you could see, put a verse, the Arabic Quran, and put next to it their own translation, you will find the word order of the English version with the Arabic order of sentence. Arabic order of parts of the sentence. It has to be English. That is fundamental because this is my first criteria really. I took it from Surah Ibrahim in the Quran. The verse I talked about. God says, every messenger we sent used the language of his own people in order to make things clear to them. The language doesn't just mean vocabulary, but the way and English structure and the English language and the English culture. What is English? What is real English? Not Arabic English or Persian English or whatever. This was my first criteria. Second criteria was, you see, objectivity, because I could see from the long list of translators that some people were not objective. Even Muslims, some of them were not objective. They are there to either to praise Islam or to criticize non-Muslims. And the non-Muslims were there to show that some of them, that the Bible is better than the Quran. You see, that's not objective. You will have to be honest and produce what is there. And for instance, someone like Hilali and Khan, which is became very famous, being published and given freely to all the pilgrims in Mecca. يعني, you see the man's translation, he's very obviously Muslim, so he does not say Allah, for instance, and he doesn't say God. He thinks that God is not Allah, and everything Allah has mentioned, he will say Subhanahu wa ta'ala in the middle of the translation. Whenever the Prophet is mentioned, he said Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, because his target was the Muslims, and he used using the translation as an act of worship, as if you are in a mosque, jami'ah, not in a university, which is jami'ah. I teach in the University of London as a teacher in a British university. So I do not force my Islamism or Islamic way of thinking on them. I have to be objective. Difficult, but it can be achieved for sure. So objective, it has to be English. It has to be objective. It has to be accurate or correct. This is difficult to achieve for many people, because the Quran is not an ordinary text. The Quran uses a language which is above the level of language which people speak or read even and write in. Higher level of language. It has its own rhetorics. And if you don't know that rhetorics, you are likely to take things wrong. You see, you have to learn علم البلاغة. For sure, absolutely, rhetorics in Arabic. البلاغة in Arabic, علم البلاغة consists of three parts. One of them is called علم المعاني, translated normally as science of meaning. This has been neglected in the Western scholarship of the Quran for a long time, up to very recently. It was not. When they translated books from Arabic and Balagha, they neglected that part, which is essential. Jahaz said, if you don't know that, you shouldn't talk about the Quran. You should not talk about the Quran. And I can just give you one small example. There is the style of the Quran being so special. There is something called iltifat. Iltifat literally means turning aside. Turn this way or that way. That is, the speaker is talking about himself in the first person singular, and then God speaks about himself in the plural of majesty. who have created yes, who has created the sky and heavens and sent down water from which we, you see, God says, who has created the heaven and the earth and sent down water to you. He's talking about himself in the third person, and then all of a sudden he said, by which we gave you sustenance and gave you plants which you would never have been able to produce. Anybody other than Allah? No. Why does he shift like that? Because he chooses the part of the sending water and which they cannot claim. They can claim that water fell down from the sky. They can claim that, the Arabs. But who would? God says, by this water we gave you drinks and we produce for you and so on. Very effective, schooling the plural of majesty to show how essential, how special this ability is. No one else could do it other than God. Yani this was very strange to Quranic scholars. Even Noldika, who's a great scholar of the Quran in Germany, he was really the main and the best scholars, found this strange. He said this is bad grammar, wrong, bad grammar, because he had not read the Ilm al-Ma'ani. Ilm al-Ma'ani. If he had read it, now I was the first to produce this, publicize this iltifat thing in 1993. And then apart from that, in Ilm al-Ma'ani, you have particularly something called siyaq, the context of the speech. If you are not aware of the context, you would go wrong in the translation. I can give you a number of examples. For instance, إن الله قوي, or just a second, عزيز حكيم. عزيز حكيم. God is mighty and Hakim. This Hakim occurs in the Quran 94 times. Most of it is about God. But in very little places it means wise. Whenever they came across this Hakim in the Quran, they translated as wise. God is wise. Wrong. And this has been proved by an Arab who heard in Allah Alimun Hakim. And he said, yes, he has power, so he judges and has the power to decide on things. Hakim, to decide on things. Okay? So this just one example. And another example is Ar-Rahman. People keep saying the most merciful, where in fact, in the context of the Quran, not just mercy, but power and majesty as well. Rahman, with mercy goes power and majesty. So the translator in 2007 who wrote من يكلأكم بالليل والنهار من الرحمن قل, say يا Muhammad, say, who can protect you night and day from the most merciful? Who can protect you night and day from the most merciful? If he's the most merciful, do they need anyone to protect them from him? Yet people kept repeating this. I call this one of the terrible things translators do, to stick to the wrong assumptions of earlier translators. Wrong assumptions of earlier translators. أخطاء السابقين. And this is rife in the Quran. Even myself, when I first started, I was not fully aware. I became more and more aware of this as I began to study and teach something called the language and style of the Quran. This is essential. If you want to understand the Quran well and its effect, you will have to learn this. I have introduced this in SOAS for my own MA students. They like it very much, and it is the only way that really understand things without making such silly mistake as who can protect you night and day from the most merciful, and so on. Now, so the criteria: accuracy, clarity. It has to be clear in order to have any effect. It has to be clear. And if you are literalist in your translation and atomistic, people take word for word for word. They think of a word, move on to the second word, the third word, and so on. This is destructive for real understanding and appreciation of the Quran. Literalism and atomistic approach is the one that leads most people wrong. You can't. You have to take wider vision of the verse and of the paragraph and of the whole surah together.
Okay, that is a point towards you, Marlo. Oh, this is really difficult. Okay, I think.
You see, like many people, even people in this century, put the verses of the Quran, because the Quran puts one verse followed by one verse followed by one verse from beginning to end of the surah, because this is what the Quran in the Osmani edition, Khalifa Osman edition of the Quran, surah, is one, you see, put in one single paragraph. Surah Al-Baqarah, which is nearly 40 pages in one single paragraph, no paragraphing in the middle or subtitling or anything, because they did like that before. They found that if they stop or leave any space, someone might come and add something or put a tafsir. So, but to come to our time and put paragraphs, the whole surah in one paragraph, that is literalism, or following literally what was there in the Arabic. That's wrong. I think my greatest, one of my best contributions was dividing it by paragraphs. And this has been praised by many people. And in addition to dividing, being aware of where a paragraph ends, there is something else which I called to be aware of what sections. Sometimes the Quran suspends presenting the material in order to add something to support that, rather than being part of. For instance, talking about divorce, 2 or 3 pages, and then and asking people to be honest and helpful to each other and kind and so on, and then it stops and says حافظوا على الصلوات والصلاة الوسطى وقوموا لله قانتين. Keep the prayer in the best way, or the middle way, middle prayer, and stand before God. Just like that. When it has said this, it goes back to continue talking about divorce. What is the effect of this? Enabling. It reminds them, stand up and do the prayer in order to make you remember God and be kind and honest and merciful towards each other. I call this enabling. What is the function of this? Is enabling. There are many, many examples like this. People like Bill said, what on earth is this doing here? Because he doesn't understand how the Quran arranges its material. Now, what else do I want to talk about? We said clarity, impact of the Quran. This is very important. Flow. It has to flow. Yeah, many versions, translations before me did not flow because, as one of my students said, it's like you go on as if you are riding a tractor in a rugged land, and it does this. You need it to flow. When my translation appeared, I remember one of my colleagues, Kate Zabiri, looked at it and said, for the first time, the Quran flows in English, nice and smooth. That's important. Impact. We can have long to talk about the impact of the Quran, why to achieve. So these are criteria of the Quran. Now, we need also to talk about qualifications of those who do the Quran. You have to know the Arabic very well, not just Arabic, but the Arabic at that time of the Prophet, and the style of the Quran, the way the Quran arranges its material, the impact in the Quran, the stylistic features of the Quran. You have to learn all this in order to get impact. And this
Okay,
is...
Yes, Dr. Haleem, Professor Haleem, we have actually now exhausted the time of the presentation. Maybe if you agree, we can start the session
Yes,
of Q&A.
okay. Really, I tell you this. It
Yes.
really is, you can't give much, say much. There's so many things you have to say to make the Quran, make you understand why a good translation is a good translation. The best way I do this with my students is that I sit with them in the class. We have a number of translations next to each other, read and see how they have translated. Then, by that way, that's what you should be doing. Tell your own students to do that. Sit together, have 2 or 3 translations, compare. You learn more.
Yes.
You learn more that way. You want to do the... I have one, and thanks to my assistant, Ne'ma, who is the manager of the Center of Quranic Studies, said you should give one example. So, and she herself took one example, which is Surah Al-Nazi'at, chapter 79, and took a few sentences at the beginning and gave about 5 translations there. There, it shows how people can go wrong. You see, it shows how people can go wrong. Can we, for instance, who can anyone, is Ne'ma there?
Yes.
Yep, I'm here.
Would you like to read 1 or 2 of these?
Harfi, are you going to go through the slides or shall I?
Huh?
I'll put them on sharing.
They are on the sharing?
Brilliant.
Yes.
So should I start with Maulana Muhammad Ali?
Okay, yes.
So his translation for Nazi'at is, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by those yearning vehemently, and those going forth cheerfully, and those running swiftly, and those that are foremost going ahead, and those regulating the affair.
Good. This is one.
We could move then to Arbery, which is a departure.
Yes.
He says, the pluckers, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, by those that pluck out vehemently, and those that draw out violently, by those that swim serenely, and those that outstrip suddenly, by those that direct an affair. Then I think Professor wanted to illustrate Hilali Khan, the King Fahd Holy Quran Printing Complex. That is, in the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, by the angels who tear out the souls of the wicked with violence, by those who gently draw out the souls of the blessed, and by those who glide along on errands of mercy, then press forward as in a race, then arrange to do the commands of their Lord. And
Thank you.
we'll move on to Professor Abdel-Haleem's translation. In the name of God, the Lord of mercy, the giver of mercy, by the forceful chargers, raring to go, sweeping ahead at full stretch, overtaking swiftly to sort a matter out. And the last, most recent one, the Qur'an, a verse translation. In the name of God, the all-merciful, ever-merciful, by the angels who force out the souls of the wicked, by those who ease out the souls of the blessed, by those who glide, swimming, and those who strive, racing, to arrange the world's affairs as commanded.
Interesting. What we have here, the Arabic, وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا يوم ترجف الراجفة, etc. These verses appeared very strange to translators of the English culture, and they said that they don't mean much. Someone like Alan Jones says this is Kahin style. Muhammad was imitated the style of Kahin and just saying these words, they don't mean much. That is wrong. That is wrong, because what we are talking about here is God is talking about an experience from the Arab history, the history of the Arabs. The Arabs were tribes, and they would attack each other. They would come early in the morning, in the dark, with great speed with their horses, attack, so the women will be terrified, and the men will be shaken up. All of a sudden, coming all an attack, and all of a sudden, and at which people will be terrified. What is that is really is giving a foretaste to these Arabs of how the day of resurrection will affect them. It will come suddenly, while they have not expected it, and it will be terrifying for them. That is what is meant by this. They did not get that. Why did they go wrong? And nazi'at, they keep saying, by nazi'at, naza'a is to pull out the souls of the kuffar, and to pull out the souls of the believers gently, and swim. What is this? Why did they go wrong? I think they were not aware of one very important feature of the Quranic words, which is called wujuh al-Quran. One word has many meanings. Even the word deen in the Quran has been shown in the dictionary to have 13 meanings. Religion is only number 7. So this feature, words having many meanings, how to decide on the intended meaning in this context is the context what we are talking about. So the word kafaru and kuffar also has many meanings. In each situation will decide. So when these people said naza'a, which true, it means pull out. But there is another meaning in Arabic language and Arabic culture, and nazi'at, to run at fast speed. Horses running at fast speed. Nazi'at gharqan. And then when it's called as-sabihat, they like swimming. See, at one point, this as if they are swimming in their speed. That is what's intended. That is what's intended because of the context. This is to telling people how they would feel at the time when Al-Qiyamah arrived. Just as they know it from their own experience, attacking happened all of a sudden. It will terrify them. So you have this. And how did I know this? I knew this because of Arabic culture and Arabic poetry. We have it in Arabic poetry. used in this way. And the greatest poet, Al-Mutanabbi, he used all these words referring to horses running. So they left out this. Also, we have it in the Quran in chapter Al-Adiyat, number 100. Horses running to attack in the morning. But they didn't. Those who said pulling out the soul and swimming, they did not. The wujuh, the particular meaning of nazi'at here, they have no awareness of the context. No awareness of the context and no awareness of what the Quran said somewhere else. That's it.
Somebody wants to ask a question.
Okay. Anyone wants a question? I said, I'm told.
May I ask the question, please?
Why not?
Thank you very much, Professor Abdel-Haleem, for your presentation. My name is Hamid Tehrani. I'm the head of the library at the Islamic College. And back in 2004, we published a Quran, a translation of the Quran by Mr. Ali Gholi Qarai, which was called a phrase-by-phrase English translation of the Quran.
Oh, I see.
I don't
This
know
was
if
done. This was done by the Islamic College.
yes, we published
Yes.
it in 2004. The first edition was done by us, and now over the past 2 decades, the translator has made a number of revisions. Now it is the 6th edition, which is no longer published by us. It's being published by the translator himself. Considering that our edition came out at the same time as yours, did you have a chance to be familiar?
No, I really have never heard about it before now.
Okay,
You
well,
see, and this is not surprising. I tell you this. I only mentioned a few translators. There is now about 100 translations of the Quran into English. This is amazing. Quran is a very difficult text to understand and to appreciate. Everybody now is coming out with a translation. The translation you mentioned might be very good indeed. I have to see it first. And thank you very much for reminding me. But I keep, yani,
Maybe we can arrange to
in this
send
country
Dr.
and in
Professor Haleem a
America,
copy.
and in America, very many people are coming with translators. It really is amazing. The Quran is difficult. I am reading it day and night. I read one juz of the Quran by heart every day of my life. And I teach it and I translate it and I find it amazingly complex and not easy to translate, and yet everybody thinks they can translate the Quran. As I said, I'm not talking about this particular one, but there are people in America and in this country. It really is amazing. I can see why they want it. If you know, I tell you this, if you translate the Quran, your name will go into the British Library forever. And if you are lucky enough to translate a popular translation like myself, you get some good money out of that. So that's why so many people, but that's wrong. I am translating and revising all the time.
Jeremy,
how many revisions have you done to your
Up to there is one up to 1916 if you want, but all the time, you know, I invite people.
20.
People write to me 1916. 2016. I invite people to write to me. And sometimes they come back with information that there is one wrong verse numbering. I thank them. I thank everybody who shows me that something is wrong as they think. I put all this together and my own notes, which I keep adding all the time. And every few years, I will bring a new edition. That's how I do. I can see how it is, how difficult it is from even 1, 2, or 3 editions.
Jeremy wants to ask a question.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for pointing it out. Thanks. Right, Jeremy, go ahead.
First of all, thank you so much for an absolutely fascinating discussion. I could really have very happily listened to you for hours more rather than just the time we had. At the same time, it leads me with lots and lots of questions, but of which I can ask really only one.
Good.
You gave us this explanation of what was going on in Surah 79 and why other translators had run into problems. But my question to you is, given what you had to say to us about the cultural background to this, can it be translated as such, or does it need annotation and commentary in order to convey to someone in England what on earth is going on?
That is, you are a beautiful man, and this is a beautiful question. Okay? When I was talking, I wanted to talk about clarity. Part of clarity is what is called paratext, additional text to the translation. This can be done. I do it in the introduction to the surah, and I explain that in Surah 79. And the footnotes. So introduction, the footnotes, sometimes if it is short, it can go within the text. I have to keep the text intact itself so that it remains to be translation and not paraphrasing. But one have to add paratext to explain. I've done this, and I am intending to do more. I tell you one other thing. When I was asked by Oxford University Press, they said this will appear in their series called World Classics, and it is one particular volume. Size. Yes, here it is. One particular size. I cannot go very much beyond that. I can, but now I'm intending, inshallah, in the next edition to do more, to add more. You see, to add more. Because one important thing about additional, because sometimes the translator, if they are Muslims, sometimes they are trying to praise Islam and criticize others. If they are Christians, they are trying to show that Christianity is better. I have none of this, and I accept whoever sticks to the real text of and being objective, wherever they come from, if they are Sunni, Shia, whoever, Muslim, Jews, Christian, whatever, I stick to those who have the real, what I consider better translation and good translation. Absolutely, because I'm not in a mosque. I'm a teacher at one of the biggest British universities. In fact, it is the biggest, London University. I have to respect my profession. I have to respect my position.
Ali Paya wants to speak to you, and so does Adam Lent. Ali Paya.
Yes. Carry on, Ya Ali Paya, if you have any question. I have not finished what I wanted to say. There's a lot of material, but here it is. We are limited. My time. Ask whatever question you like now.
All right, Professor. Thank you so much for a fascinating talk. I always refer to your translation when I'm reading my daily dose of the Quran, and I try to compare your translation with other translations. Now, my question to you is, when you were working on your own translation, was there any instance that you came across a phrase or a word in Arabic in the original text of the Quran, whose meaning was not quite clear to you? So had there been any case in which a phrase needed to be somehow put into translation in a vague manner? Or had it been the case that always
I would do
quite clear about?
In such situations, I would have a footnote, because you have to stick to what you are doing is a translation, not a paraphrasing, but you have also to explain to people that this can be translated in a different way. That is honesty and objectivity. I have long lists of corrections, not by me, just by me, but by other translators. If you give me any translation, whenever I come across something wrong, I will mark it and put it at the back of the book. There are so many of this that
I guess you should publish all those corrections, because those corrections of yours would be beneficial for us.
Of course, we have to one day, inshallah. I tell you this. The Quran is something very special as a text, not just necessarily, just by being the religion of Islam and so on. Really a very important text, and it has its own language, its own style. This has to be shown to people honestly. I try to do that within the limits of space and time, but we really need. You know, the best thing what I can do with the Quran, if I sit with a few students or friends who know much of the Quran, and we sit together and read it thoroughly, and discuss. And with this, you reach as meanings which you haven't thought of before. That's why I suggest to you that you read this with your students, a number of them, especially better ones, to read beforehand, not just make sure they have read. Take a surah, work with surahs, okay? That's the best way. I do that with my students. Take a surah, I send them the Arabic beforehand and my English translation beforehand. It is with them for a month even beforehand, and then come together and discuss it. And by the way, when I read the Arabic, when I give them the Arabic, I mark divisions of sections. It's not marked in the Arabic Quran. I have to. Marking or dividers, stylistic features and structural dividers are very, very important. There is one chapter of one of my books about structural dividers, which is very important. So get a few students, give them the text, you study it beforehand, and don't assume that you just arrive and talk and sit with them and read together. You get better results. Better results.
Adam.
Yes.
Adam.
Yes, we have Adam. Adam, please go ahead.
Adam, yes.
Assalamu alaikum, Professor. Thank you very much for your talk and for your translation. Actually, your translation of the Quran was the one that I bought that led to me reverting to Islam. So I want to thank you personally for that. I had a question. Apologies if it's slightly off topic, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. Obviously, as good as any translation of the Quran can be, we are always told that any translation will miss out the eloquence of the Arabic language and the unique style of the Quran, which is closely related to discussions of the Quran being a mu'jiza, or the ijaz of the Quran. Do you have any things do you know of any works in the English language that might help people who are reading the Quran in English to better understand what it is about the Arabic of the Quran that is so remarkable, so that they might understand that?
Thank you very much. I'm glad your name is Adam. We must listen to anyone who is called Adam, because Adam is a very important person in the Quran and for us all. Yes, I do this with my students in a class called the Quran Language, Style and Translations into English. Some of it appears in articles and part of my books. Inshallah, there will be at one time a book about that.
Okay.
Read more. See, there is something called Oxford Handbook of Quranic Studies, which was edited by Mustafa Shah and myself. It was has about 53 articles by different people, of all sorts of people and all sorts of ideas. Read more, read something like this. You will learn from it what I said about context of the Quran.
Sorry.
Yes, Sharif. Okay, Sharif, go ahead for your question.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salam.
Jazakallah khairan, Ustaz Mohammed, for the talk and for Islamic College as well. Bismillah, I don't mean to be rude, just two quick things. First of all, Barakallah Feek, I would like to say that you, Sheikh Ustaz Mohammed, reminds me of Alama Iqbal, Mohammed Iqbal. Second thing,
he was greater than me. Yes, go ahead, please.
Second thing, is there, as Brother Adam just mentioned, like the richness of the Quran and the diverse ability of different translation, is there any books in the market that combine different translations that might be in one book? And second thing, is there any other, apart from the Quran, astaghfirullah, but from any in our rich heritage, like maybe in Timbuktu or Persia, any translations that need to be translated from certain books in history?
You have articles here and there that compare specific sections or of the surahs and so on, but I don't know of anyone who compare the whole Quran in one book. I don't. We need more. What we need is to get people to read. We need more people to work on the Quran and its style and translations into English, really and truly. As I said, when we have said everything about all translation, I would say this. The Arabic text of the Quran is the supreme authority over every translation and every interpretation of the Quran, of whatever kind they are. That is why I said anyone who gives me the correct translation, I would welcome it wherever he comes from, Muslim, non-Muslim, Sunni, Shia, this, that. We need to work on the text of the Quran itself and do our best to show the text.
So, says Muhammad, the question was like a translation that has multiple translations. Like maybe it says Muhammad Abdel-Haleem and I don't know, Sahih International or Abri,
if you
just all in one book, just to try and summarize the meaning.
What my students do in the MA translation, they have written a dissertation of 10,000 words after the course. Normally, they will take something like International Abdel-Haleem, this and that, three or even four. Compare them in their own dissertation.
Barakallah feek, Sheikh. And any other translations of other books apart from the Quran that maybe might need to be translated for the benefit, richness of the faith, etc.?
Translation of Islamic text to help the understanding Islam.
Yes, just like for example, well, even from non-Islamic, Dead Sea Scrolls was translated. Is there I'm just saying, like any other book, like say, I don't know, is there a Rumi book that hasn't been translated, or a Ghazali book, or some scholar in the past or something?
Now you enter into a great an ocean, Rumi and Ghazalis and so on. There are, of course, much of translations of these people. If you look, I'm sure even Google will tell you some translations of Rumis and Ghazali and other great scholars of Islam.
Draz that you've done.
Draz. Oh, by the way, this is a very good translation. There is a great Egyptian Azhari scholar who studied in addition to Azhar in France wrote a book called The Morals of the Quran. Has been translated into English, and he had a book, a lovely little book called Introduction to the Quran. I advise every one of you to get yourself a copy. It has been translated by I.B. Torres. We paid for it to be translated. Introduction to the Quran. If I have the book, it must be somewhere here. Every one of you should get a copy of this. Translation, Introduction to the Quran by M. A.M. for Muhammad, A. Abdullah, Draz, D for David, R.A.Z. M.A. Draz. Introduction to the Quran by M.A. Draz. This book is great in itself. The man has given something which really, and we have it, the author or the publisher has it seen by different Muslim scholars, Shi'i, Sunni, everybody praised it very highly.
Right. Okay, Professor Haleem, I have a question from Narges. She can't use the microphone, and the question, I'll read it for you. Salam. Thank you for your insightful and enlightening talk. I would like to ask a question regarding your observation about the elevated nature of the language of the Quran and its distinctiveness from other languages. I found your comparative approach to translation particularly impressive, especially in encouraging your students to analyze your translation choices. Then he continues, however, I'm curious about the challenge it poses by the fact that many Arabic words carry multiple meaning. What strategy can be translated or employed to ensure that the holy text is not interpreted based on a personal bias or subjective interpretation, but rather in a manner that remains true to the essence of God's teaching?
Everybody will do their own subjective, but we are there. Me and you and everyone else interested in this will be there to find out for themselves whether this personal translation or opinion is right or wrong. And nobody is above that. As I said, the Arabic Quran is the supreme authority. Alhamdulillah, my own translation has been widely accepted, and it sells very well, by the way, and bestseller. But the Quran, the Arabic Quran, is the supreme authority.
Right. Okay. Any other question? I don't see any hands
Sorry,
up.
can I ask a question?
Yes, definitely.
Well,
You
thank
are
you very
introduced.
much. Do you have my voice?
Yes, we have your voice. Introduce yourself, please.
Well, I'm Mawaki Mashhadi, a student of theology in the Holy City of Qom. I have a question from Professor Abdel-Haleem. I'm really thankful for his comprehensive lecture. And to understand the Quran or the context, we need some such factors as occasion of revelation or Quranic exegesis. Did you refer to any book on this topic? And can you name some of them about the occasion of revelation or about the exegesis of the Quran?
I tell you one thing, I'm glad you mentioned this. We discover things in the Quran. I discovered something which I called Rad response. For instance, we have Surah Al-Duha. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. Addressing the Prophet ﷺ, by dawn in its brightness, by the night when it goes still, your Lord has not forsaken you and does not hate you. It starts like this. There is a background for this. Some Arabs in Mecca, when there was a cessation of the revelation, after one time at the area of the revelation, there was no revelation. And they began to say, Muhammad's Lord has forsaken him and he hates him. They said that. The Quran comes to deal with this, it does not say these silly people or these people of the kuffar of Mecca say that your Lord has forsaken you or hates you, but in fact he has not forsaken you and he does not hate you. It doesn't put it like that. It goes straight. والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى. By dawn, by the bright morning, and by the night when it goes still, your Lord has not forsaken. Ignoring what they said, not giving it the credit of speaking it out in the Quran, but it answers. I call this Rad, answers. I have discovered this in the Quran, the feature, Rad. This does not make me need to hear the Asbab al-Nuzul, because if I realized how the Quran speaks, I would understand what is the background of this. What is the background? I'm going to develop this in an important article, inshallah. There are so many everywhere in the Quran, and I can go on and on giving you examples of this. We have to discover the way the Quran speaks. This is one feature of them. Doesn't give you what gave rise to this issue from what the kuffar says, but it answers them immediately. Sometimes people say, why the Quran is saying this here? If they know this feature of Rad, they will not ask the question. Someone must have blamed the Prophet or made a statement or so, and the Quran comes back to say, no blame on you in saying such and such. And why does it say no blame on you in eating together as people within the family? Simply because people ask the question, can we set members of the family, aunts and uncles and this? It says, لا جناح عليكم. From this, لا جناح, no blame. I understand that this is an answer to someone raising the question and objecting. This is just one feature. We need to do more of this, discover features like this in order to understand and appreciate the Quran. Without this, you will find everybody saying, what on earth is he doing that here? What is the... There's many questions, even for Muslims. However, more?
Yes. Right. Okay. We have 10 more minutes. Anybody?
I can tell you I'm here until midnight, if you can do that.
Okay. Well, yeah, they will shut the building and we will be closed inside. No, but we have 10 more minutes. And if anybody has a question for Professor Abdel-Haleem, please do it now. Obviously, we will. Okay, we've got. Let's scroll through. Yes, there's an iPhone here. I'm not sure who can you identify?
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Amir, and Assalamu alaikum, Professor.
Yes.
Hope you're well. Thank you very much for the very powerful presentation. I just have a question, Professor, if you allow me. However, it may not exactly related to the translation as such, but like a critique perhaps in regards to the Arabic language as you deal with it and have dealt with it extensively. That is the language that we have, the Arabic grammar today, is based upon the Quran. Is it because then everything, the laws will be laid because of the Quran. So some may be critical of saying that there's nothing very supernatural or special about it because the laws are based upon the Quran itself. And nothing, because in the previous traditions, it was all samai. There was nothing written down. But now when they started writing down, they have based everything with the grammar of the Quran. So obviously the Quran will be the perfect because the laws have been written based on the Quran. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you very much. The Quran was the, it is the source of all Islamic knowledge. This has been said by Suyuti, great man of the 17th centuries. Everything goes back to the Quran. In a sense, that was true of the Islamic tradition. Why the Arabs did not have formal, now spoke Arabic, of course, correctly, but they did not have any text to write, to talk about Arabic grammar and how the sentences are structured or anything like that. It was a result of someone making a mistakes in reading the Quran that they began to realize that the Arabic grammar has to be written down. And by the way, it's great that the greatest and most important text in Arabic about the grammar of Arabic was written not by an Arab, but by a Persian called Sibawayhi. These people from Persia and we now called Iran and beyond Central Asia, they became Muslims, and it made them use all their energy and their intellectual abilities to serve the Quran. So the first great book on Arabic grammar was written by a non-Arab, but by a Persian. They entered Islam and they brought with them their own great traditions of writing and learning and studying. Bukhari is not an Arab. Tirmidhi is not an Arab. Abu Dawood, however, Ramzi in the Quran is not an Arab. Zamakhshari was not an Arab. And yet these people mastered the Arabic language just as good and sometimes even better than the Arabs. And they wrote. We have recently, in last century, or even, I think it's last century now, Farahi, a man called Farahi in what was India and now became Pakistan, I think. He wrote about the Quran in Arabic, in a style of Arabic which matches the highest style in the classical period. I'm amazed. This man who is not an Arab, but because of his commitment to Arabic and the Quran, could reach that level of writing. I read now, his style is just like the best in the classical Arabic tradition. And not just the grammar, but the rhetorics of the Quran. People start to talk about rhetorics in order to appreciate the Quran. Writing down the Arabic calligraphy in order to, because of they have to write the Quran in calligraphy and so on and so forth. Modern Arabic now is different slightly. It has still some relations to classical Arabic, but by the way, in Arabic, you have the written language, what we write, and the spoken languages in the street, and that is spoken languages full of foreign words and foreign structure and so on. It is two languages in any Arab countries at the moment.
Right. Okay. I think we'll probably take a last question from Dr. Jahangir. If you have your microphone, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Professor. Thank you very much for the wonderful talk. We benefited a lot from your talk. So 2 questions basically. One is, I'm not sure if you have gone through the study Quran by Professor Sayyid Hussein Nasr. If you have gone through that, how do you see the translation? Of course, he has translated. Yes.
Said Hussein Nasr is one of the greatest scholars of Islam living now. I have no doubt about this. And he actually talked about my translation when he saw it. He was surprised by the level of English language. And he said, why did you do it like that? Because he himself, coming from a traditional Persian, Arabic, Islamic, at much higher level, he was surprised. He has his own taste. I very much respect it. And so his book, people around him, that's all, that's great. But as I explained, I had a different leadership, meant make things clearer, you see, than people. But he's great. May God give him long life and strength and great works he does.
You had another question.
Can I ask my second question, Professor?
Yeah, go on.
You do that, yes.
Yes. So among the criteria you mentioned for a good translation, you mentioned culture orientedness, you mentioned also clarity, flow, and impact. So my question is that and also you mentioned objectivity and accuracy. So the question is that if you want, as a translator, if you want to be culture oriented, and if you want to keep the clarity and impact and flow, wouldn't you be forced to compromise on objectivity and linguistic accuracy? So how do you balance between these?
Objectivity, I mean by objectivity, that those people, for instance, Christians who are there to criticize the Quran and say it is not as good as the Bible, as the Bible, or Shi'i trying to criticize the Sunni, or Sunni criticizing the Shi'i. This is what I mean by objectivity. You will have to be in the middle. You have to concern yourself with the text, linguistics, and not campaigning. I am not an imam in a mosque or a preacher in a church or whatever. I'm a linguist who deals with the title, will deal with this text as a language text according to its traditions and its stylistic features and so on, but not there to see. There are, as I said, there are a number of people who one can understand what they are doing. If, for instance, people or the Hilali and San, they do it that way. Great, they are doing it for Muslims, and this is what they feel. They feel they are serving Islam by that. I serve the Quran first of everything by being as much as I can objective in translating it in the way I feel I should do as a teacher of language and linguistics and stylistics, and not as an Egyptian Muslim or what this or that. Because you see, I think people will find you out very quickly if they will discover that you are there for your own reasons. My reason is to serve the Quran. And I once said in a lecture in Cairo, in the American University, I would like to see 100 translations of the Quran better than mine.
And with that statement,
because I serve the Quran and not myself, or the Arabs, or the Persians, or this or that, or Sunni or Shia, or Christian or Muslims.
Great. And with that statement, our program comes to an end, and we thank very much Professor Mohammad Abdel-Haleem for his insight into this journey about the translation of the Quran. And I just want to remind also the audience that we have regular programs. So for the next program, I will suggest to log on to the Islamic College website and check for the update of any forthcoming programs. So thank you for attending, and again, many thanks to Professor Abdel-Haleem. And we probably try and send you a copy of that Quran published by the college, so that you can evaluate it, inshallah.
Very much so, indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.